So the third monograph that we're going to look at is a monograph not conducted in Thailand, like the first two. We're going to be going to India, and although the one that we've just looked at was based on a study of nuns, Buddhist nuns in central Thailand, done by a young female researcher. This next monograph is going to be looking at a woman's a school for girls, a madrasa, an Islamic school for girls, in India, and it's done by a Dutch scholar, and she's done a very nice study of these female madrasas. So let's have a bit of a breeze through some of the things that she mentions. And so her methodological, much of the detail of her methodological detail is actually quite further on in the book. And she mentions doing work in India, in a Muslim part of India, after September 11th, in a way that resembles doing what I did in South Thailand. So let's read on. So during the planning phase of her research prior to 9/11, she began to do field work by doing a pilot study in two places, Delhi and Hyderabad, in late 2020. And she mentioned that at a local research institute, the Henry Martin Institute, she was introduced to some girl madrasas, some female schools. But after that, after September 11th, things changed significantly. When she returned after September 11th, she was very aware that the new war on terrorism initiated by United States was going to be impacting the life of Westerners in India and relations in the Muslim world. And she found that it was problematic to get access to these girls' madrasas because everyone was under close scrutiny due to their alleged links with violence and terrorism. So she recalls the way that she looked for some help from her colleagues, who introduced her to a local friend, who introduced her to some other schools in Old Delhi. However, I consulted directories of Muslim organisations in Delhi, through which I found addresses and phone numbers of girls. On one hand, it turned out to be relatively easy to interview representatives of various Muslim organisations, and she mentions them. And so she comments, apparently a Muslim counter-discourse was taking shape in reaction to the allegations voiced by the media and on the streets, owing to which many public figures were eager to be heard. On the other hand, women working in girls' madrasas in Old Delhi seemed anything but eager to be heard, because all attempts at making contact over the phone or in person failed. Another practical problem was whenever she tried to contact women by phone, she had to talk to men such as husbands and fathers and uncles before being able to talk to these people, and most of the time they did not come to the phone, and that frustrated her. The entire family seemed almost apologetic about being so uncooperative, and they explained that recently they'd heard that journalists, Indian and foreign, were trying to pretend to be interested in madrasas so that they could write awful things about them. So she recounts the way that after 2 or 3 visits to a particular family, she found out more about a little small neighbourhood girls' madrasa and she asked if she could accompany one of the teachers there. The teacher replied that she would have to ask permission for such a visit, as outsiders were generally not welcome to the madrasa, even more so foreign non-Muslims. So again, the issue of her religious identity is arranged. After some haggling, permission was granted to visit the madrasa. And she mentions that she even resorted to a different strange strategy by trying to get access to a girls' madrasa through the head of the council running it. Since nothing appeared to work, she decided to pay another visit to Hyderabad. There the scenario was similar, and she was no longer allowed access to girls' madrasa that she had visited a year before. So after returning to Delhi, tensions seemed to ease slightly towards the end of 2010 with the help of a colleague. So she goes on, developing rapport. One day, the manager of a madrasa granted permission to come to the madrasa regularly in the front office of the madrasa that she did her study in. This breakthrough was facilitated by his decision that I intended to do something useful with my research. While doing research was something familiar to him, it was something quite alien to the young woman inside the madrasa who continuously asked me which university in Delhi I was affiliated with, when I was going to attend classes, and why I spent so much time with them when I had my own work to do. Similarly, during the first month of fieldwork, my otherness was a central concern. As a result, the students and others I met in the madrasa deemed it important to achieve my conversion to Islam. Among those who wished to see me convert were elderly teachers who introduced himself as a friend of the founder and in charge of the madrasa's front office. So they exchanged phone numbers, and he pointed out he had some interest in reading materials for me during her Urdu lessons. The phone rang, and after a short time, the Maulana came to convince her to embrace Islam by repeating the Shahada. And so a few days later, we read on that another friend was waiting for her at his perfume shop in the bazaar. And although I was aware that such contacts with men put me in an unfavourable light in the eyes of the young woman at the madrasa, she decided to meet the Maulana, or the religious teacher. She was hoping that her position as a researcher would grant her a small bonus regarding her respectability, but when she arrived at the shop, after they greeted, she noted the presence of a young man who looked at me a lot less favourably than his friend. Like the later, he was a recent Deoband graduate, and then the three of them sat down inside the perfume shop, which is open towards the street, so that everyone going on inside the shop was within sight of everyone passing by. The young graduate eyed her with open hostility, looking at her gaze, and talked about, as she talked about the everyday events in the madrasa. When the Maulana asked the young man what was wrong with him, he replied with a fierce glance that it was not right for his friend to talk to me, as I was not properly covered. Indeed, my head was covered with a scarf, but it was not a proper burqa or hijab. The irritated young man expressed that she would go to hell for that, and left. This was not the first encounter involving people who condemned her for being a Christian in front of while conducting research, and she goes on to discuss this. A third episode took place sometime later, when she was starting to teach English at the principal's request. It was the first year students that day who had finished their lessons from the English reader when one of the girls asked whether I could read the Quran. When she said that she asked whether she had performed wudu or ritual cleansing before touching the Quran. She explained that she had not, but that she was reading the Quran in a university and that it was a non-Muslim who had taught her Arabic. Well, some of the students indicated that they got the point. The girl who had triggered off the discussion insisted that it was very wrong to know that the ritual obligations without abiding by them, and it was something that was wrong irrespective of circumstances. And then she and her friends then continued to give her a detailed lecture about wudu and how to do it correctly. So this was another example of the importance of religious differences between the researcher and the fieldwork environment. She goes on and explains some other interactions, continuing to encourage her to change her religion and to become a Muslim. And then she explains a bit later on about how she got married. She was going to get married, and that her husband was a Hindu, and that the teachers repeatedly asked. Repeatedly asked whether he and his family had any problem with her coming to the madrasa, and that she explained that her in-laws were mixed Sikh and Hindu, and they were very lenient towards her work. And she mentions that following her wedding in 2002, her position inside the madrasa changed once more. Despite her persistent refusal to convert to Islam, the teachers and the students appeared to come to terms with her otherness by assigning her the role of a new daughter-in-law, or bahu, and soon that I would be an expectant mother. So she was pregnant and expecting her first child. As most of them were familiar with both roles in the Indian extended family system, her new standing within the family seemed to suffice for granting me a place amongst the teachers at will. And so this is a long extended description of all of the problems that a young Western Christian single woman had in conducting research. And so I would recommend that you take the time to read through this, because this is a very, very common aspect of modern ethnographic research, where we are aware that we are just not flies on the wall, that we are when we come into some contexts, it takes us a long time to gain access, and that is one of the reasons why some research projects need to take 1 and sometimes even 2 years in order for everyone to be comfortable with you personally and that they understand what you are trying to do professionally. So this is one of a number of methodological discussions that really interrogate the problems that researchers had in gaining what we refer to as access to a fieldwork site. Thanks for listening, and we'll be moving on to the next one soon.